So since it's already a little after 1, we'll go ahead and just get started. I want to welcome everyone for joining the McGovern Center's Arts and Resilience Lecture Series. My name is Anson. I want to thank Angela and Alma for all their help with coordinating today's talk and this entire series. We're really excited to introduce artist Killjoy. I do want to just briefly mention a couple of us attended a workshop she led at the Contemporary Arts Museum back in January. And I'd say in the first 2 minutes, it was very clear she's very intentional and thoughtful in her work. This was a workshop that was exploring identity through mask making. And I still remember something she said in January because it really struck a chord with me. And the group was talking about masks and identity. And she had shared that, sometimes the mask is just a smile when you're not feeling like you really want to smile. And I remember thinking oh, wow, it's something we all can relate to. So subsequently, her workshop was awesome, very intentional, thoughtful artist. I will share just a little bit about her bio before I hand it over to her. So Killjoy's family is originally from and partly based in the archipelago known as the Philippines and partly in Texas. Her work sits at the intersection where jungle meets desert. Killjoy's work is grounded in honoring the earth and seeking environmental and social justice. Her work is an interpretation of world mythology and a study of ancient symbols. She integrates storytelling with calls to global, mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual awareness and action. And I think that really does do her some wonderful justice in her description. So we're going to turn it over to Killjoy. If you have questions as we continue the session, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll aim to go through the questions at the end. Okay, Killjoy, it's all you.
Thank you. And thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak with y'all today. I'm really excited. This has been something we've been trying for a whole year. So I'm really happy that it's happening. So my artist name is Killjoy and I go by Joy. I will be sharing my screen with y'all. I have a presentation that I've prepared. So can everyone see that?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. So this is a little video GIF that I made during the pandemic, but I start here because a question that I often get is, why Killjoy? Why did I choose that as my artist name? And I partly chose it, and I was partly destined to be it. My birth name is Joy, and Killjoy is a phrase in the Philippines. That's commonly used. And so, don't be a killjoy is sometimes a thing that's said. And then when I started thinking about that, killjoy and why I chose it, um, I think about dying every moment in the present to give birth to our new selves in the future. So who we were just 2 seconds ago, just a second ago, we're a new person and constantly rejuvenating ourselves. And so if Joy was my birth name and that's given to me as an assignment to identify me as a person, and ultimately identifying with anything is a form of ego. So for me, ultimately, the name Killjoy is killing joy, which I associate joy as being my ego, and killing my ego every moment to give birth to my new self in the future. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because that's the question I most get, why Killjoy? A little brief background on me. I am Filipino American. My parents are Filipino immigrants who came here in their late 20s, early 30s, and met each other in West Texas. And that's me with them. My mom is a very adventurous person, and I'm so grateful for that because that sense of adventure was instilled in me at a young age. There I am in the Philippines with all the matriarchs of both sides of my family. And then a photo of my mom when she immigrated to the US and she would do big road trips to national parks with her friends. Part of my bio states that I sit at the intersection of jungle meets desert. And what I mean by that is that I am a child of the diaspora. So I'm Filipino American. Um, I of Filipino culture, but I was not born there, nor was I raised there. I've been fortunate enough to visit throughout my life, but I am from West Texas. I was born and raised in West Texas. So this is a picture of the Philippines. It's a popular beach spot, Palawan. And when people think about the Philippines, they think, beautiful tropical beaches, paradise. This is also the Philippines. Those beautiful paradise beaches aren't accessible to the majority of people living in the Philippines, and I think that becomes a very complicated identity. And then, of course, not to mention the 300 years of Spanish colonization, followed essentially by 100 years by US occupation and colonization. So the Filipino identity is very layered, it's very complicated. And so that representing the intersection of jungle and desert, that representing jungle, and then where I'm from, West Texas, representing desert. This is my town that I was raised in, Odessa, very, very different from the Philippines, but what they both hold are they're places that are constantly extracted for their resources, and that influences the culture in these localities. That's another shot of West Texas. So, that the previous shot of West Texas was not the most flattering, but West Texas holds magic as well. And when you look out into the horizon, it's 90% sky, and thunderstorms just look immense. They're incredible experiences, and they look like this, just lightning bolts touching down at multiple points. So I wanted to share a little bit about me so you understand where I'm coming from when I approach my art practice. I am a child of the diaspora. So in a sense, I'm from both places, and I'm also from neither place, being the US and the Philippines. My practice includes printmaking, murals, and puppets. So I'm going to go down through those practices, starting with printmaking, leading into murals, and then finally puppets, and why I do what I do. This is an example of printmaking. The style of printmaking that I'm involved with is relief printmaking. So on the left-hand side is a block of linoleum, which is a rubber-based material, and on the right side is MDF, so wood. I carve both flat blocks of linoleum and wood to make images. So everything you see that is white has been the part that is carved out. And then everything that is inked black is the part that was left untouched. These are masks from Guerrero. The previous one was mythology, world mythology. Let's see, show anyway. Oh, that's too bad. So in my earlier days of printmaking, I am and was very interested in mythology and the natural world. The image that's missing is just another picture of a bristlecone pine tree, one of the oldest living trees in the world. So this is an example of carving floral images onto wood. And something I really love about printmaking, oh, that's too bad. The middle part is the essential part, but these were images that were carved to be book covers, and the book covers is about community healing and helping. The middle image would have been the photo of the book. But something I really love about printmaking is that I studied it in college as a fine art practice to make editioned prints. But after college, I soon realized that printmaking can extend far beyond the formal fine art print. This starts the examples of my explorations of that. Printmaking naturally leads away into a process called paste up. And what paste up is that you're literally taking these paper posters and you make a glue-based solution in your home, and you just go out into the street and paste them up. So these blocks are about 3 by 3 inches linoleum that I've carved, and they're the 10 most commonly used herbs for medicinal purposes. And then I blew up the image so that it's larger. Now in the image on the right, it's about 3 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet, excuse me. And I just take this image that I've carved on a smaller scale, I blow it up on an inkjet printer or another hand printed process, and I take them around town. These paste ups were done in Mexico City. This was a market. This is where they toss out the food that they don't sell or that's ugly. And to me, putting up these paste ups in these spaces is just sort of rejuvenating and making these places beautiful that we see as garbage. I really enjoy putting flowers in abandoned lots, and over structures that we might think are ugly, or particularly I like putting it over advertisements. This one was in Colombia. I'm talking about, I'm going to try not to get so stuck in explaining everything. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. What the meaning is behind each piece. But these are just examples of the smaller woodblock carving and then being enlarged on an inkjet printer, and I'm cutting them out to paste on the street. That's a mandrake in Mexico City. I also like to make a lot of jokes on the street, so I don't like to take myself so seriously, even though the content of my work can be very serious. I also like to make people laugh, and I like to laugh in my work. So I often include some jokes in my work. Paste Up has been such a great way for me to meet people around the world. Often when I travel, I bring posters with me and I link up with artists wherever I'm traveling, and they're usually down to make a Paste Up collaboration together. This print is one of my most popular prints. I made this right after the pandemic started, and I just wanted to call upon all these things that I know help me in my healing practices that people could conjure for themselves, no matter their status, no matter where they were. And more examples of paste ups. These are, I collaborated with friends in El Paso on this abandoned building. To me, it's the most fun way to hang out. I've never been the type to go to a bar or anything. I much prefer hanging out and making art. These are a collaboration in Costa Rica. An artist that I met there did the middle figures, and then everything around the middle figures are pieces from my work that I just stacked as a background. This is in Houston, Texas, where I'm currently based. This one is near a volcano in Costa Rica. You know, they can be very fun excursions, like the art of paste ups. As I said, I just take posters with me everywhere. So I took a bunch of posters with me to Costa Rica, and we ended up hiking up to a volcano, and these abandoned structures were right by the volcano base, and it ends up just being a whole day's mission. So my pace of practice, which had been individual at first, at first it was me printing things and deciding I want to put them on the street, then quickly became a community practice, which is another thing I really like about printmaking. For people who aren't familiar with printmaking, you need a lot of presses and equipment that usually a single person doesn't have access to or can afford. And so to make prints, you're usually in a communal space that either you're the university or a space that rents out time to artists, but you're usually in a shared space. You're not ever in a silo or isolated. And that's another thing I really love about printmaking. So whenever my paste up practice became a community practice, it was very natural and easy to collaborate with people who were interested. This is a paste up mural that we did in Houston's 3rd Ward, honoring George Floyd. It was pasted on the anniversary of the 1-year anniversary of his death, and his family were involved. They sent a photo of him and his mother. That's the photo on the bottom. It's a little washed out because of the paste, and his sister was able to attend, and it was a really beautiful and healing experience over something so tragic. More examples of my paste up. When I first started, as y'all saw, there was a lot of floral and creative imaginary creatures. And bringing it into social work, I was able to start thinking about stories differently and start making paste ups to tell specific stories. So here I was invited by this school in Minnesota to come make a paste up with all the students. So all of the skulls we printed on site, and these pipelines, and we were talking about the pipelines that are running through Minnesota. When pipelines break, they damage the land and the water that they run through. Let's see if this video loads. Okay, it looks like it'll work. So here's an example, and it has music, so I won't talk too much over the audio, unless maybe you could hear me. So this is me with all the students in this art class. After we printed screen prints of these skulls and the posters, we cut them out and we started pasting them up in their courtyard. And so it exists as a protest piece in the university.
Me encanta salir de noche, yo no le temo a la oscuridad.
Okay, let's see. I guess the next one, I don't know what's not loading, but we'll just continue moving on. So part of my practice is also mural making. I think I'm now moving out of the paste up phase of my presentation and sort of moving into the intersection of paste up, mural, and printmaking. Whenever I paint murals, the aesthetic is very much influenced from my printmaking style. So these fists were images that I've carved, but then we project the image onto these cardboard sheets and paint them. So even though they look like giant carvings, these are actually painted fists. And this happened before the State of the Union address in the Philippines, where we were demanding that the real situation and real living conditions of the people be accurately reported on. What made this install so amazing is that Duterte had just been elected. This was re-elected, and this was a while ago, and everybody was feeling sad. I mean, I'm sorry, excuse me. The children of Duterte and Ferdinand Marcos had just been elected into office. So previous dictators, everyone was feeling really bummed out by the news. And the day before this action that was planned at a consulate, I had texted everybody and was like, do you want to come to my house and we'll make these big signs? So it took us 6 hours building out these puppets, essentially. And my house was just filled with people painting these images onto cardboard. So every available space, we just laid down cardboard and started painting all of these signs that the next day we would march to the Philippine consulate. Oh, that's too bad that these aren't showing. I don't know what's missing. Oh man, what is this? Oh, that's too bad. So this is a banner this is showing a banner that I made. The photos would have been the photos of the banner, but here's a video. So when I was in the Philippines earlier this year for 3 months, which is when I was originally supposed to give this talk, but that would have been 3 in the morning. I was invited to make protest banners for May Day. And so I come up with a design and then we project it onto a banner. This took us also about 6 hours for us to just paint, and then it was marched on the streets for May Day during the protest. Hey, that's too bad those pictures aren't there. But I segue into this. This was made in 2020, Pandemic as Portal, which I was very inspired by an essay written by Arundhati Roy, talking about the pandemic being this time for transformation and not something to fear. And so I made this image that was then widely distributed everywhere. The screened images were in Piccadilly Square in London. It was published in books. It was just distributed widely. And the reason why I use volcano in this image is because I've always felt that volcano is so symbolic of revolution and change, and like a sitting energy that explodes and then changes everything afterwards. So taking back just a reminder back into my printmaking process and how the aesthetic of where these images come from. It's very much inspired by Mexican printmaking, the Talla Gráfica Popular. This use of white and black and very heavy lines, very bold and strong imagery is something that printmaking taught me and that I carry into my painting, my mural practice. These are just examples of what a whole block would look like. These are all volcano sites I've visited. And then the right-hand side is a close-up of what that carved wood looks like. So leading now into my political poster practice, volcanoes being this symbol of transformation, change, revolution, rebellion. I also lend so much of my graphic work to direct action groups, to environmental and social campaigns, and definitely to Philippine causes. I usually make myself available to do that. And so all of these were posters that were used in actions taking place in the Philippines. And usually what that involves is freedom of the press, peasant, farmer, fisherman, worker rights, political prisoners. Philippines is one of the deadliest places for journalists in the world. And it's so all these causes are usually something I lend my time to. And so this is an example of a carving that's printed on cardboard. It's this Filipino idea of bayanihan, which, on the coastlines and in rural communities, indigenous communities, they still have houses called bahay kubo that are made out of palm and bamboo. And because the Philippines is an archipelago and because of climate change, these coasts often flood. And the community takes it upon themselves to make sure houses are moved to higher locations and that everybody is safe. So more posters that I've done for environmental causes based here in the US. I definitely talk about pipelines a lot and how they affect indigenous communities and the land that they travel to throughout, that they're imposed upon. These are images I did for Filipino campaigns, mostly about the previous person in power, Duterte, and now his children. Constantly thinking and talking about social and environmental issues and how they are the same thing. They're not separate from each other. What affects the social is the same thing as the environmental, and how it's all tied into one. This is 2 out of 4 posters that I did for a campaign in Micronesia. The research for these pieces is often really devastating. And for example, in the Detoxify, what this piece is about, it's about these war submarines who release out sonar, and then it confuses the whales, who will sometimes beach themselves because their sense of equilibrium is off. So that's a war submarine next to an indigenous sailboat that's still being used today. And all of these have really difficult stories that if I were to get into each one, this would be a 24+ hour talk. So I'm trying not to get too stuck on one. But I did want to end this series. I always want to end work on an uplifting level. Like I do think that the political situation should be presented and explained, but then not just left at that. Without a solution piece, then it's just doom and gloom, and there's no point in that. And so leaving the piece off on answers, which to me usually revolve around giving land back to Indigenous people, making decisions communally, being led by elders as well. These are parts of these are works that I did for campaigns here in Houston, talking about unionizing teachers, and then also the West Street Recovery, which is a direct action group based here that gives aid to people who've been affected not only by Hurricane Harvey, but just by lack of infrastructure that the city sets out. More community-based projects, lending my graphics, and then making banners that everybody has access to paint by projecting it onto these cloths. And then everybody has involvement in these pieces that are then used on the ground and in street actions. I also very much am an abolitionist. And so what that means is I don't believe that oppressive systems should exist that keep people locked up. So that definitely includes prisons. And what I've done a lot of work around is abolition and working with youth and mothers to imagine a future without prisons. And so in this discussion, that means so much more, not necessarily the absence of something. Definitely we're calling for the absence of prisons and other oppressive systems, but it's more advocacy for the presence of structures that will even prevent that being a thing. So better schooling, better housing, better food, just all of the basic necessities that people need to survive, and not only survive, but thrive and live a life of dignity and not from a place of lacking. So this piece was a piece that I carved from wood, where I was paired with I've been paired with several groups who do workshops with women and children who have been incarcerated, and they hold workshops where the participants can write poetry about their experience during that time, but more the focus is on imagining a world without having had to live that experience. And this image is printed on handmade paper. The handmade paper is made from the shredded court documents of these mothers. This was a billboard. This is a design for a billboard that I made in collaboration with youth leaders who took these same poetry workshops, talked about a future without prisons. Oh man, that's too bad. So that was, the next slide was photos of the billboard throughout Philadelphia. But these are two girls who were part of the cohort who wrote poetry. And so much of the poetry and taught in these abolitionist workshops, it's about growing things. It's about nurturing ourselves by nurturing the earth. It's about being with families and staying together. So this is a series that I more recently worked on. They were originally carved to be stamps. I can actually get to that. That's actually going to show up in a minute, but all of the imagery is inspired by youth poetry and what they imagine this future to look like, and what a future that we're building towards. And it was so much about growth, The majority of it was about being outside and being able to grow things. And then this last image is a kid asleep in their bed, free to be a kid. You know, the room can be a little messy. Their foot is hanging off the bed because they feel safe to be able to be that vulnerable, not be tucked away under the covers and scared, and safe to dream and be a kid and grow up without having that experience of being put in prison. Originally, these images were carved to be these stamps that is part of a traveling exhibit that teaches about abolition. What is abolition? What is the prison experience? And then the people going through this exhibit ended with a workshop where they could make posters from their understanding of what a future without prisons would look like. And so here are the images on the right that I carved for this workshop. This one was for the Women's March here in Houston. I think I have this picture here. So just talking about reproductive rights, women's rights. Okay, so now going into my mural practice, and I think I'm making good time. Maybe I'm rushing too much actually, but it's difficult not getting a reaction because I can only see myself in my screen. So hopefully everybody is still with me. This is my mural practice. My mural practice gives me even more space to be imaginative and creative and tell these stories. And so I do believe that in public art that's going to be there for a while, I prefer to make images that are happy to coexist with, even if the topic they can talk about is sometimes hard. So the images of the families on the birds is talking about immigration and migration and how that should be free for people to seek out better lives if they need to. And then the other image is talking about access to clean water. I'm painting here a grandfather plant, the tobacco plant at a university. So because I've also always been interested in nature, I'm interested in what plants have to teach us. Because, you know, unfortunately, plants have become politicized in our modern world. So I feel that we could equally learn as much from each other as human beings, as from animal people, from plant people. We're all learning from each other and existing in this same world. So enjoying and suffering all the same consequences. I really love mushrooms. I think mushrooms are just some of the most amazing creatures in the world. This one is a mural 1 mile north of the border in El Paso, where I'm basically I'm using allegory as to paint the situation at the border. So you have bunnies in cages. At the border of the barbed wire is a lot of violence. And this mural stretches about the length of a football field, and I had 5 others helping me, and we painted it in a week. This is a mural in Costa Rica in a botanical garden there doing research around climate change. So they wanted me to represent all of the flora and fauna in the garden, but it's Costa Rica. That's a lot of flora and fauna. So I tried my best. And ultimately the story that I wanted to talk about was water as a resource and how in the future it will be a very precious resource. And talking about this in a place like Costa Rica that is so wet, it's not maybe on their immediate minds, but in places where it's drier, it's already a crisis. This is a mural that is in Houston, Texas. I like when I'm in Houston, having lived here now since 2020, driving by large fields, abandoned fields often, and how they're overgrown, and in the overgrowth there's all of these wildflowers and native species, and although this abandoned field that looks like maybe nothing to human eyes is just this wild ecosystem that's nurturing all of this plant and animal life. And so This is a common milkweed here that attracts butterflies, and just talking about open spaces. This is also a mural in Houston, Texas. I painted it on the day known as Thanksgiving, and just talking about US imperialism. And then my work always comes back to being from a child of the diaspora, in particular Filipino American. So this piece is about the Philippines and Mexico, and both places being colonized by Spain, and their language and culture being erased, the indigenous language and culture. And it left a very violent legacy. But in this particular painting, I'm actually talking about the commonalities that's shared between people of the land known as Mexico and the archipelago known as the Philippines. And, I did a lot of research on this piece, and came back with so much amazing information, that indigenous words in Mexico currently exist in the Philippines, and vice versa. This structure here is called a palapa, and it's very common on the Mexican coast. But the structure was actually brought over to Mexico by way of the Manila galleons, which were these ships that had a trade route from the Philippines to Mexico. And usually indigenous peoples were the ones working these ships. So indigenous people from the Philippines were brought over to Mexico, brought over this structure called a palapa, taught indigenous people in Mexico and people in Mexico how to make this structure that is now all over the coast and is known very much in Mexico. And in fact, the word palapa is a word from the Philippines, and it means palm. And then everything that the palapa is protecting, the mango, the coconut, the tamarind, all staples of the Mexican palate, were all things brought over by way of the Manila galleon from Asia. Some details. So I represented Philippines by Lapu-Lapu fish. Lapu-Lapu was a general that took down Magellan, and then the fish is named after Lapu-Lapu, and then the dog is the xolotl, the hairless Mexican dog that is sacred to their culture. And finally, going into my puppet phase, which I'm currently in right now, I recently built out a puppet installation with so many organizers, activists, and artists from Houston. Had folks over at my house every day building out this set. So it's currently on view actually at the Ion until February, if y'all are interested in seeing it. The piece is split into 3 parts. This part is called Creation. The entire piece is called Creation's Current Solution. So this piece is representing the creation window, which to me is our creation story, and constantly checking back in with that, because no matter the current state of the world, sometimes being so devastating, we are these amazing entities that are alive and existing in this world, and we can do so much more as outside of the structures that are imposed upon us. And I always think that. So the creation story, these ants working together, going up this anthill that's modeled after a rice terrace that's built by many, many hands. This earth deity in the back protecting the anthill. So that's the full installation, and so many aspects from Filipino folklore and culture. For example, the stars in the back are these stars from Filipino folklore that swoop down and eat people. And it's not necessarily a bad or good thing. It's just an animal thing, like when the lion catches the zebra, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just a circle of life thing. You don't want the lion or the lion family or cubs to starve. Of course, it's very difficult to see the zebra being eaten, but just part of the life cycle. And so just talking about those, reminding myself and viewers of this, of that life cycle, that we are part of the life cycle, and that human beings aren't above it. Like the circle isn't here and human beings here, which is structurally how capitalism sets us out to be, but that we're actually part of the circle. And so this earth deity, with their hands protecting this anthill that represents community, cooperation, and these snakes starting to prey in upon the scene. The second window is called current, which is short for the current political situation. So here I'm talking about, again, pipelines and oil spills, and how that affects the communities and the land that they're imposed upon. This is a giant marionette, and it does move in the window, but I've yet to receive a video from my videographer about it, so I wasn't able to include a video of this marionette dancing in the window. So then I'm moving to the third window of this piece, the solution piece. As I mentioned, I always like to give a solution piece and not leave with a feeling of sorrow and despair. And so in the solution piece, when I was talking to activists from the Philippines, like very much involved in the work, and I asked them, I was like, what is a piece? What is something you would like to be told in a piece like this, in a giant puppet display? And the answer was usually like that decision, like indigenous land being given back to indigenous people, decisions being made communally and not by the 1%. Elder-led societies. And so that's what I tried my best to convey in this piece. Like the arms are hugging each other, or like embracing each other, holding each other. These heads move. Maybe this will be oh, here's a video of it. So the heads are dancing in unison, and everyone's being able to hold each other. And beneath these heads is a rice terrace, which I haven't been able to include close-ups on. But a rice terrace very much being the structure that nourishes the people, was built for the people, and is an example of people living in harmony with the land. So that's the structure that's underneath that I don't have a lot of photos on. At best, I have this close up. So that's my presentation. I ended about where I wanted to. If anybody has any questions or feedback, or you don't like what I'm sharing, I also like to hear that kind of stuff too.
You have a lot of questions in the chat. That was awesome, Joy. I'll throw out some of the questions from the chat. One is about kind of what brought you to Houston. It seems like you could have kind of gone anywhere, and you've been to a lot of places, but kind of do you have any information about that or thoughts?
What originally brought me to Houston is that my parents have been based in Texas, and I wanted to be closer to them. Before 2020, when I moved to Houston, I was in Mexico City for 5 years. And then I wanted to be closer to my parents during the pandemic. I chose Houston because Houston is, I think, has so much to offer, especially in terms of diversity. You know, one day I'm walking, I was biking down the street. I was biking throughout Houston one day, and I intentionally went to a Filipino event. And then just along the way, there was a Colombian event. And then just another along the way, there was a Vietnamese event. And I love that so much about Houston. And I also think it's really important with the work that I choose to do, being so involved socially, environmentally, that work is being done in the South. You know, I think Texas usually gets a bad reputation. People kind of outside of Texas think Texas is this awful place to live. But there's a lot of people here doing the work. There's a lot of people here on the front lines. And I just think that this work, the work that I'm doing, should exist in the South.
It's wonderful. Yes, I think it's one of those well-kept secrets that we're such a diverse city. So that's wonderful. I actually had a question because one of the things you talk about, which I think is really relevant in medicine and medical practice, is this idea that when you're doing research on some of these very difficult or maybe like kind of emotionally, I would imagine, draining scenarios, you referenced like the whales that were getting beached with the sonar, and you talk about having like a solution piece at the end. Um, is that something you had to like come to? Was that something you naturally came with? I mean, I'm always thinking about how in medicine we have often very heavy situations that like young learners, students, residents are dealing with, and trying to find ways for them to find like what that solution piece could be. And sometimes that's incredibly frustrating, or may feel, at least on our end, maybe not as achievable. But I wonder what if you have any thoughts about how you came to that, or any just feedback in general.
What I definitely came to within myself was that I needed a solution piece because the research is so devastating. It's always devastating. And the news is always devastating. And so it would leave me feeling so drained and so depressed and even hopeless. That's what I came to on my own. But what I come to never on my own, always with the help of community, it is what that solution piece is. So that always comes in conversations and collaborations and chats and asking people like, what do they need? What is the solution? And at least from my standpoint, I mean, I know you're asking this from a medical viewpoint, but from my standpoint as an artist, I know that I don't have those actual solution pieces. Like I can have ideals of what I think would make the world better, but in terms of like actionable things, like that comes from talking to people on the ground, doing the direct work and understanding their perspective on it, and then for me visually translating it. But I definitely have learned that in my own needs, this is what I need. I need a solution, but I'll never arrive to that by myself.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's actually very relatable. It's partly, I think, why the humanities is in medicine, for that very reason. It's often not something you can get to on your own. So I think that message is super helpful and super relatable. So what's next for you? Do you have like some next, you always seem to be doing something really big and amazing, and you're kind of all over the world. So what's next for you, or your next project?
Um,
If you
well,
can share, yeah.
I think I can share. It's been announced on other platforms. So um, I am currently working on the Montrose Public Library based in Montrose. So um, talking about the story of Montrose, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to include the Indigenous perspective, the Black perspective, the Mexican perspective, and then the LGBTQIA perspective, and all of these communities and how they built up Montrose to what it is now. Um, so that's what I'm working on in Montrose, and that's going to be mural, it's going to be carved wood, and hopefully it's going to be lights as well that are dancing throughout the piece. And that's happening, that's opening next year. Another thing that's opening next year is an installation I'm doing for the new Meow Wolf that's going to be coming out in the summer of next year.
Oh, wonderful. Very cool. So staying busy, which is great. I love that you're so authentic. There's this theme of community in all your work. And so thank you for sharing all of that with us. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know it's often they're running to lunch, but we really appreciate you, the work you're doing, and your time here today. If you all have any questions, you can find more information about Killjoy, her website, and her socials, and you can keep an eye on all the amazing stuff she's up to. So thanks again. We really appreciate your time. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation again. I've really enjoyed keeping up with each other. I will mention about the Ion. So the puppets are actually animatronics. So they move, as you saw in some of the videos, but they only move starting at 5 p.m. Because of the glare of the sun. So the installation exists as a nighttime animal. So if you're interested to see the installation at the Ion, from 5 p.m. to midnight is when the puppets are moving. And other than that, I am on Instagram as kill.joy.land. And I do a decent job of keeping up my projects and also trying to not be on the screen. So maybe I'll see y'all there.
Yes, wonderful. And the Ion is just a little north of the medical center, so it's definitely not a far visit for most of us. So yeah, we should definitely go take a look. Well, thank you so much. And again, thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next time with Mathieu Jean-Baptiste, and we'll go from there. So thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.